So I think we are starting where we left off at the last meeting, and it's discussing possible action relating to the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy's service recommendations for public engagement. I think we kind of cut you off last time. Eric, is there anything that you or your team wants to add relative to the overview before we get into the discussion of the scope?
I don't think so, but let me just say this, and thank you, John, for the opportunity to share. I think we're looking at this as trying to meet what we assume to be your needs. So take this document as that as its primary purpose. And we sort of broke it into two phases. The first phase is really about data collection and gathering information, and there's a couple of different options for how that could be done. I won't get into that right this second. And the second phase is sort of like, okay, now that we have this information, what do we do about it? And then if you take the phases together, our approach is looking at this holistically as we can, which is how do we encourage public voice and input into the process. So that's sort of what you see all along the way, from the listening sessions on the front end and on the back end to sort of deliberative dialogue. But just know this, phase two, I'm certainly not ready. I don't think our team is ready to say this is what phase two really must look like. In fact, if anything, I would argue phase two is really a placeholder for, now that we have information from phase one, what is the best process to move forward with public input on next steps. So I would be very cautious about looking at phase two as anything other than a possibility of what it might look like. I think phase one is a little more concrete, and I think based on the information that's gathered there, that will dictate and help you make decisions about what phase two might look like. So I'll just stop there and see if my colleagues have anything to add to that.
I think you put it really admirably, succinctly, Eric.
Same. You did it.
All right, thank you. So what questions, comments to the members of the task force have relative to the proposal? And Mayor Rosenberg had sent out earlier today the slides from the last meeting. And do we have any questions or a recommendation? I think we were looking for trying to move this forward, to try to get that process set up as soon as possible so that come early 2021 we can begin engaging the public. And there are a number of charges for us to do that in our charter, which we'll be covering later. But are there any questions that members have or any concerns relative to what you've seen? If not, I would entertain a motion that we recommend entering into the contract with Wppa for, I think for the sake of the discussion today, the phase one of the work relative to community engagement as it relates to the policing task force's work.
I would just ask if there could be a little more explanation of the community listening step. What would be proposed for that?
Sure, can I take a stab at that, Pat? Thanks for the question. I think, again, for me, from our perspective, Pat, the listening session is really setting up for what might come in phase two. In other words, if we're going to do some sort of a major public dialogue process or deliberation process or of inquiry process or any process that's going to involve the public, we need to get information from them, and we need to name and frame the issues that need to be discussed by the public, and we don't know what those issues are yet. So the listening sessions is a way to sort of gather information and provide an opportunity for public input in a much broader way than, say, if we just did a survey or we just did focus groups. In other words, I'm looking at this listening process as more like, you know what, we're going to open this up to anybody who wants to say anything they want along, whatever lines that you think are the key questions that you want information about. And it gives you the chance later to not only name and frame the issues in phase 2, but also allows you to authentically say, we have done our best to gather information, from as many people as possible. Now you could say, well, isn't that what a survey is for? And isn't that what potentially focus groups are for? The difference is that with listening sessions, and I link very closely to the listening sessions, the online questionnaire, which is just a basic kind of, open-ended 4 or 5 questions, not a traditional survey, that gives people a chance to, and I hate to call it this because I know this is a kind of a pejorative term, but it gives them 5 minutes at the microphone to be able to say what it is that they need to say. So I think of the elements of the phase 1, the listening sessions may be the least important in terms of what that data will be, and in terms of how effective it will help you to make decisions. I see it much more as literally an engagement tool. Like, how do we get more people involved in the process so that the public really has a voice here and has a chance to articulate whatever it is that they want to say, independent of the survey and focus groups. That said, if I had to eliminate one of those items, it would be the listening sessions. But I'd love to have my colleagues also weigh in if they disagree.
Hi, Eric. This is Ruth. I don't disagree, but I would like to sort of add a perspective, which is that surveys asks very specific questions. You have all experienced surveys. You've probably all built them, and you certainly all responded to them. So the listening sessions coming earlier allow the surveys to respond not to the information we assume is going to be interesting or important to the constituency. If we have the listening sessions first, we don't prematurely close down avenues of concern or inquiry, because the listening sessions are designed to give us insight into what, sort of residents themselves are concerned with without us having to do that guessing. So I'm not sure, they might yield the data that is going to be least conclusive in figuring out how to respond with action to anything that, any changes that might need to be made to law enforcement in Wausau. But I would argue they might be the most important thing in setting up an atmosphere of inclusivity and ensuring that folks who are normally underrepresented genuinely have an authentic voice in the process, and to make sure that whatever direction the rest of the data capture takes, it's responding to the genuine concerns of residents rather than our assumptions about what those concerns might be. Does that make sense? Do you understand the distinction I'm trying to make? And I don't know how Eric and Sharon, you folks feel about what I just said, so feel free to, contradict me or provide a different perspective.
I'm just going to break in here. This is Katie. I think this is a really cool part of this because it helps us identify themes that will inform that survey. I think that I would love to do all 3 of these. So if you're looking for something to inform your motion, I think this is the right direction.
I'm looking for.
This is Mike.
Go ahead, Mike, sorry.
I look at, as a social researcher and stuff, I like the layout of it. I think it's I sort of like I like having those listening sessions to almost, to give you some working tools. My concern of not having them is then you start to be challenged by what your survey tool is. And really how are you making that specific to the voices that we're concerned about? Which, Ruth, I think you were bringing up, is that, really, we can't make some assumption that, we take a survey tool that's been used someplace else has merit here. And sure, some of the questions will, but I think I like the sort of the flow of it. for me. And so I do think that there's validity to have all three parts.
I would just add as a WIPS colleague of Ruth, I really appreciated your explanation, and I actually agree with your reasoning. I think it not only does what Mike just said, but it also, I really think it provides an opportunity that a survey will not. Let's face it. I mean, however we do this survey, whether we send it out via email, whether we make it, an open call to the public where they can do it online, whether we canvass neighborhoods, there's going to be a certain level of participation, let's face it. And by opening up sessions like this, both online and via virtual or even in-person platform, depending on how COVID is doing for us, it really does give people more opportunity to voice their concerns. And I think that's always going to be a better way to start any project that could be potentially have tensions built into it just because of the nature of what we're talking about.
And I just like to add, I think it could also increase the likelihood that we will get participation and responses in a survey and in a focus group setting, that you establish that buy-in or trust amongst the community such that they'll want to engage in the process in those other components, either the survey or the focus groups. So I think, Ruth, you did a nice job articulating the benefits.
I agree with the importance of the survey and, listen. I mean, need to listen at first and then throw out some ideas and listen to those and, really do our best in these crazy COVID times to listen to our community and what their concerns are, because, we're not the only smart people in town.
All right, with that, other questions or motions? That's an invitation.
Do you have a motion to proceed on this?
Yes.
I'll make a first motion to proceed.
All right, Will moved to proceed with phase one, the three components of phase one, listening session, survey, and focus groups. That's our
I
motion.
got a second.
And Pat seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Eric, we will be, I'm sure, in touch with you as we work on developing our approach, and once the city signs the contract, we can move forward.
Well, we are really excited. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Quick question, not that we have to answer this right away, but probably the first thing on our minds is, what would be your ideal timing to begin such a process? Let's say the listening sessions, obviously, first.
My opinion would be is that we would need, as soon as possible in January, understanding that it's difficult to communicate effectively over the holidays. So I think you would want to begin, be in a position where come January 2nd, you could send out the invites to the listening session and begin to structure them. But too many things get lost over the holidays. And I don't know if this year will be different, but things get lost. If that makes sense.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, I did have one question, because I'm looking at sort of the timeline here, and I'm thinking that the timeline should probably 1 month off, like we were just saying, like the plan, like the community listening, that's January, community survey focus group February. So I think everything should be about 1 month off to effectively move forward. And I think community listening session should have a component of in-person, but then also allow people who, again, maybe work and can't come in person to somehow submit comments somewhere. Let me figure out obviously a good way to publicize that in many places.
So we just went through, if I could just interject, a process with the county board size task force, where, and Eric, this is something for you to consider, but we had we had intended to do 3 public hearings across the county, but because of COVID, we couldn't access public facilities outside of the city. And then the numbers spiked, and so we decided it was not a good decision. So we went with a listening session, and we videotaped that with public access, put that on the website, streaming. And we allowed people the opportunity to fill an online survey. We had a dedicated phone line where the messages could go in, and we allowed for emails and or letters to be submitted in the traditional way. And it generated 118 responses, which we thought was quite good given the environment that we're in. The problem with some of those is that it's not interactive, and if you don't have a way of setting context, your comments can be everywhere. So we want to give some thought to how we can do that. But Eric, I'm sure you have more experience with this than we do. In this COVID environment, it's more difficult to get that. But if you could give some thought to how we might go about ensuring or maximizing public participation.
Absolutely, we will. And I actually really appreciate you sharing what the county did, because that sounds really fantastic, all of those methods of gathering information, and I think we'd want to absolutely do our best to replicate that. This kind of leads to a question that I've been thinking about, which is, John, I think you and others have worked with us enough to know that how we really like to work, if we can, is not for Wpps to somehow be off on an island, doing our thing, but to really be working closely with a team, whether that's the task force or some subset of the task force, so that we can discuss these exact kind of ideas together and say, like, okay, so let's say we try those 4 or 5 modalities for gathering information. What about this other modality? What about this? And getting feedback along the way. So is this something that the task force is interested in, and what might that look like in terms of how, who we might interact with and how frequently?
It's an excellent question, which we haven't given thought to this date. It's been Chief Levin's mayor and myself, but that isn't the universe, and certainly there's room for improvement. So if others are interested.
Well, I'm not trying to question the grouping. I just want to make sure, are we going to be thinking of this as kind of a collaborative approach, so that we, it's not just Wpps coming in and saying, we're going to do X, Y, Z, but hey, what do you think about this? And then making sure there's some feedback mechanisms.
Do members of the task force have thoughts?
I think there needs to be some collaboration. And I think that we have a group of people that come from different backgrounds. I'm the stats and research method geek, so I would enjoy helping out or being willing to sit in and help with that type of the processes and stuff, and where I can be helpful for.
I too would like to be a part of that. Having worked with you a little bit, Eric, through the Kettering Foundation and that kind of stuff, I'm extremely fascinated, by this type of work. And being in the school system and having, those kinds of resources and those connections as well, I would like to see, I would like to be able to, I think we all have a lot of networking pieces that we can bring into utilizing, not just through the school district and those kinds of things and those families that we make connections with. But I think everybody has, Katie did a great job of creating a circle of people that have many connections throughout the community. And I think we need to put those resources to use when we are trying to collect as much data from the community that we are. So I would like it to be collaborative.
John, if I may?
Please, go ahead, Pat.
It sounds like we're dealing a little bit with the clumsiness of this being a public body, and having to have announced meetings / work sessions, and the practical desirability of a little more agility and, ability to work with a small group and make things happen a little more quickly. I'm wondering if we could have like an executive committee of you, Katie, and wherever else, to be the, kind of between meeting liaisons with Eric and his assigned people, and then maybe bring in Mike for one of those meetings, and bring in Sarah for one of those meetings as needed, so that we can get more progress faster. Is that your concern, Eric? Is that if we meet every 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to be forever on this?
I'm a little less concerned about that, Pat, because I feel like, if we've got timelines and we've got, internal deadlines that we're all agreed on, we'll do our best to meet those regardless of who's at the table. I'm thinking more just, I think Sarah put it well, and Mike to some extent because of their backgrounds and even personal interests. I think we find that the products are better when there are more inclusivity in terms of the process, and having voices at the table to say, well, did you think about this? Because even though we might have some expertise in each of our areas, I think we're better as a bigger whole. And so I guess what I'm getting at is making sure that there are voices at the table. So let me give a quick example. We might, as an internal Wppa staff team, we might decide that we're going to meet weekly on this project, and so that way we have assignments and everybody knows what they're doing. And it may be that people from the city or the task force want to be in on those weekly meetings, or maybe they want to come in every other week or something like that. It doesn't matter to me or to us, I think, what that exactly looks like. I just think we're going to all be better off, and the project outcomes will be better by having a team-based approach as opposed to a consultative, distant approach.
So we'll look for, well, let me ask this question. So we're authorizing that the city's still got to execute the contract, which will trigger the action. When do you think you would start on this?
Well, it sounds like to me, and please, Ruth and Sharon chime in, if we want to get some kind of invitations out in early January to participate in either a listening session of some sort, or participate in a quick online questionnaire or some other mechanism, send a letter, give a phone call, whatever. We have to be, we have to have those tools in place, right? So we're going to have to be working on this at least a little bit before the new year. And I don't think that the more complicated piece for me about the first phase, the listening session part, isn't really so much the design of a quick questionnaire or putting that up online. That's actually fairly simple. It's really organizing, if we're going to do, let's say, a community virtual forum where we're going to invite people to join and do this in sort of a public format. I just want to, we just have to set dates for that, and we just have to make sure the invitations are ready to go out. So I think we're going to have to start this, quite frankly, sooner rather than later. I don't know that answers your question really, but.
Well, I think why don't we proceed and let us know, and then we will notify members of the task force. We have to be careful that quorum, so we'll have to manage participation, or we have to notice it as a meeting under the open meetings law. So that's the one caveat that we have to balance as we move forward, because we are an official committee. But we've heard from Mike and others. Will, are you interested? As need develops and conditions or issues arise. I'm just looking at who is interested in participating in that process.
Yeah, I would be interested in that process and helping out.
Ted has his hand raised. I don't know if he's spoken yet.
Pat, you're on mute. Pat,
Sorry, I will lower my hand. Thank you.
what- if you like, were you trying to talk to?
No.
Okay. Haley?
Oh, I just was gonna say that, yeah, I'm happy to help wherever.
All right, well, what we'll do is we'll try to get the schedule from Eric. We will communicate that to the task force. And if there are topics, you know, when you look at our charter, and I'm going to throw that out there, and we probably should have started there, but we are charged with participating in community engagement activities and dialogues about policing, human services, and systemic racism. And I think we want to give some thought, and we'll talk about that later in the meeting, but at what point in time do those discussions take place? But per our charter, we have those, and if there are issues that are of particular concern to members in one or the other or all, we would need to know that, and we can rotate people in and out. And I think it's good to get different perspectives at the table, just so we can, that in the context of trying to get those perspectives, we don't create unnecessary delays for Eric and his group. So we'll try to figure that out, and we'll communicate with you. So we thank you for your interest.
Okay, thanks, John. And one other quick follow-up. So just as far as a quick communication channel, when, let's say we decide at Whips that we want to start holding some weekly meetings, who would we communicate directly with about that to make sure that it gets to whoever else needs to hear it?
You can communicate with me or Katie. How about the mayor's office? I think officially, then it's in the cities, and we can distribute it that way. And
Okay, thank you.
she's your contracting entity, and the person that will approve your payments. So.
Okay, and then regarding the contract, do you create the contract and then send to us, or are you expecting us to create the contract?
I think I'm fine either way. If you, do you want to take a stab at it since you have terminology that you use?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. You know, we're a unit of the University of Wisconsin system, so I just want to make sure that you know that, and that they're probably going to have some language in there, all sorts of language about liability, and then ultimately that goes through our Office of Legal Counsel, right? And then I'm sure you'll have to vet it. But yeah, we could take a first stab at it,
Okay.
unless you have a template that you like that's already got, you know, built-in language that you want to make sure gets in there from the start. I don't know.
I can talk to our attorney's office to see if there's something like that. I haven't seen a template, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's a lot of stuff I haven't seen around here yet, so. Cool.
Okay. Otherwise, I could probably put something together as a start.
All right, well, thank you.
Ruth or Sharon, do you have any other questions? Oh, sorry. Okay,
I
thanks.
don't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
You are welcome. We look forward to working with you.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Right.
Now for
Bye.
goodbye. Have a great holiday season.
Yep. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Discussion of Garrity and Brady rules.
Good afternoon, everybody. So this is going back to the last meeting on discipline and investigations into complaints from community members about law enforcement, and there was a couple of issues we just wanted to clarify. First of all, I just wanted to let everybody know that I did send out an email today, just before the meeting, to the task force in regards to the alleged violations question. So you should have that in your inbox with some explanation in that email from me. So if you have any questions, feel free to follow up on that. So the two issues we're going to talk about are Garrity and Brady, and those are court decisions that resulted in law enforcement having to follow the court decisions. And so that's why they're named Garrity and Brady. It's after a court decision. So I'll talk about Garrity first. And this is the concept that everybody in America has a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Law enforcement may not compel somebody to speak against their interest. And so when we interview or interrogate or question somebody in custody, they have a Fifth Amendment right and don't have to speak to law enforcement. And of course, these rights extend to law enforcement officers during a custodial interrogation or interview. So during an internal investigation, as an employer, we can compel police officers to answer questions as a condition of their continued employment. But when we do that, we are compelling a person to speak and answer questions against their Fifth Amendment rights because we are law enforcement and we're compelling somebody to speak. So therefore, when we compel an officer to answer questions in an internal investigations, we advise them of their Garrity rights, which means that statements made to their employer for the purposes of an internal investigation cannot be used in criminal court. And again, this is case law. This is determined because it would be a violation of their Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. So when we conduct internal investigations, if we believe there's a possibility that criminal charges could result in the investigation, we likely will ask an external agency, somebody else, to do that criminal investigation first. That way, there's no concern that we have violated that law enforcement officer's Fifth Amendment rights while conducting our internal investigation. Any statement made by a staff member during a criminal investigation may be used in the internal investigation. So if we have another agency do that criminal investigation, all of that information that's learned in that criminal investigation, we can use internally for our internal investigation for internal discipline. So this is a clear constitutional issue, and we cannot alter our practice because the result would be suppressed statements in a criminal case. And we generally don't make a practice of violating people's constitutional rights. So that's the very short version of Garrity, but hopefully that's clear and understandable for why Garrity applies and why police officers have that right to remain silent, and why we can't use those statements in an internal investigation in a criminal investigation. Okay.
Any questions? Excuse me.
Okay. Well, I'll go through Brady quickly, and I'll talk about what Brady means. Now, Brady is the concept of Brady is that if an officer is known to have lied or be untruthful in the past, that we are required to disclose that to the district attorney, and the district attorney subsequently is required to disclose that in every criminal case that officer has worked on. So that's the overall concept of what Brady means. And so when someone is charged with a crime, they have the right to confront witnesses against them. The prosecution is required to disclose any exculpatory evidence or impeachment evidence for the witnesses they bring forward. And so when we do a criminal investigation, of course, we are witnesses in that case as police officers. And so exculpatory means anything that clears someone or something of guilt or blame. Impeachment means the action of calling into question the integrity or validity of something. So if prosecutors have information that calls into question a witness's integrity or may show something that is evidence a defendant may not be guilty, the prosecution is required to disclose that information to the defense. And remember, law enforcement are witnesses, so that pertains to law enforcement officers. And as it pertains to a police officer as a witness, Brady material is something that must be disclosed to the defense if the prosecution is aware that a police officer has ever lied, ever. Not just lied in this case, but lied ever. Brady material extends beyond untruthfulness as well, in something that is deemed moral turpitude. So that's not limited to on-duty behavior. This behavior could have happened at any time in an officer's life, on duty or off duty. Stuff that may be said on social media can be included in that. And moral turpitude is defined as an actor behavior that gravely violates the sentiment or accepted standard of the community. And so prosecutors are assumed in a criminal case to know everything that the police knows. Whether or not the police have told the prosecutors is really irrelevant. And so our obligation as a law enforcement agency is to make sure that if we are aware of any conduct that on the behalf of a police officer that is Brady material, so we're aware that an officer at some point lied or has engaged in conduct that would be described as moral turpitude, we are required to write a letter formally advising the district attorney's office that we are aware of Brady material for an officer. And so really, from that point forward, when we disclose that information to the district attorney, it becomes really difficult to maintain employment for that officer, because in every criminal case they work on, that material, the fact that they have Brady material, is required to be disclosed to the defense in every case. And so the result of that would be that it jeopardizes the criminal cases that officer works on. And so that's why it's very difficult to maintain those people that have Brady material in their past as police officers. And so you'll see that in the documents I sent you on the alleged violations, there are sustained investigations regarding untruthfulness, and you'll see that those employees no longer are employed with the police department for the Brady reason. So that's Brady, and you'll see that, hopefully you'll see that Brady and Garrity are actually very different things, and they don't really work together, but hopefully I was helpful in explaining those things, but I'm happy to answer questions if you have them.
So how many Brady letters are written? I think we covered that one time, but can you refresh us?
Yeah, how many have I written for officers on our department?
What's your
I don't know, 3 or 4, I think, is the answer. I don't know for sure off the top of my head, but we haven't written any recently in the last year. But, this is something that has really, that we've really had focus on and training on probably over the last 5 or 6 years. And so our deputy chief, Matt Barnes, one of the things that he's currently doing is going through all of the personnel files of any police officer who has worked or retired or is currently working at the police department, just to make sure that nothing in there would be included in Brady material that we may have overlooked, decades in the past. So that's a large project, but he's in the process of working through that material so that we can make sure we're disclosing that information to the district attorney.
All right, any questions of Chief Blevin as it relates to either Garrity or Brady?
Thank you.
If not, thank you so much. All right, officer-involved deaths. We've been waiting endlessly for this presentation, so.
No pressure.
None at all from you.
Well, sitting here, I want to let everyone know this involves 2 things. Can you, and specifically this video, I have a video. We're going to talk a little bit about how officer-involved shootings are investigated. I have a video that includes footage of our most recent officer-involved shooting. The purpose of that is not to discuss the justification or anything associated with that, but I'm going to point you in the direction where you can see the report completed by the Division of Criminal Investigation, and I think that video adds context to it. And I also believe it adds context to the portion of my presentation where I'm going to talk about our staff and our officer wellness as it relates to our role and the things that we feel we owe our staff in an officer-involved shooting or death investigation. So at the end, if there's somebody that doesn't want to see that, I don't want anyone to feel like they have to as part of this commission, but it's at least a heads-up warning that it's the body cam footage from our officer involved in that shooting. And I think it speaks to our staff and the effects that it has on our staff in regards to that. So if you could hit from beginning on the PowerPoint presentation. Do we have one without notes?
We should, yes.
We could probably do a little bit without notes. It makes it smaller up there, and the older I get, the harder it is to read it from this distance, or to actually see what I have up there.
Would you like to come up here?
Maybe.
That, would-
That
If-
might, well,
If we
I'll
can't
move
get it-
over and
if we
you
can't get
can-
it to just open, or I can drive from the computer.
I'm not sure why.
do you want to speak from up there?
If, give us just 1 second here. Yeah, I've never seen that happen before. Is there a way to just close the notes section?
Click the box that says use presenter view, click that.
And now from beginning?
Hold on. I need to, the way that this is set up presents it on this screen and not on this screen. Let's see.
Well, we could, if you're gonna be sitting there, we can just go down those as well in that mode. All right, well, if I just say new slide, can you click down
Yes.
as we go?
I just need to, before that even happens, I need to get this on the WebEx. I'm wondering if maybe I should just present it on that screen so that I can share it
That's
for
fine with
everyone
me.
to see. I'm sorry.
If you wanna open it up there.
And
maybe
then
that will
you can
look better.
stay up there. And then when you are ready for the new slide, let's over here, then we can just, I can just click next slide for you, so that you can.
I would like to suspend the time that I had allocated for my presentation, please.
Ben's in charge of your time, so.
Don't hit start yet.
We did skip over the discussion on the charter. I intend to do that after this presentation. Oh, if you, oh, there you go.
So if you wanna sit up here, you probably could, cause you can see it on this
Okay,
TV.
whatever you think works the best for the, especially with the individuals on.
I'm sharing my screen so the individuals can see. It's a matter of how you wanna see it.
I could see it there, set up like
You can
that.
see it there.
Well, let's go to the next slide here. Give me like the fourth slide, just so I can see if I can read the little writing. Wow, there's zero chance I can do that. I'll come up there.
That one better? Yes. Can you see that better?
Sure.
So I don't probably. And then just flip on the on switch right in front of you by the gavel. Oh, other one. There you go.
Testing. Does that work?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So if we just want to go back 2 slides, please. I just wanted to start with that we often hear about officer-involved shootings, and then we have officer-involved shootings that result in death. And so there are laws in the state of Wisconsin governing how a police department has to investigate and what our responsibilities are. And there's a difference between these 2 different situations. So we could have an officer-involved shooting that does not result in a death. And in that case, this statute doesn't necessarily apply, and we'll get to that in a second. And then there's officer-involved deaths, which include shootings. So those investigations and the requirements by statute could include a use of force that doesn't involve a firearm. It could involve a traffic crash that results in death, or a pursuit that ends in the death of an individual. So there's multiple different areas where an officer-involved death could apply to these investigations. You can move forward 2 more. If somebody has the wherewithal or the interest, you can look up the 2013 Act 348 in the state of Wisconsin, which identifies what an officer-involved death is and what the responsibility is. And so this statute and this act requires that each law enforcement agency, number one, have a policy that dictates how they will act and what they will do when there is an officer-involved death, and that policy includes at least 2 investigators, one of which is not part of their agency, to lead the investigation into that officer-involved death. And so for the Wausau Police Department, going back to 2013, we partnered with other agencies in the general area, the Sheriff's Department and Everest Metro Police Department, to create a group of individuals that we could call on each other in the event of an officer-involved death to conduct that investigation. Very quickly after that, we realized that we had some officer-involved shootings, or an officer-involved shooting that did not result in a death, but we utilized the Division of Criminal Investigation to conduct that, and we realized that our ability to bring the resources to bear to conduct the quality of investigation that we think is appropriate in something this important is much better served by utilizing DCI, Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation, than it is to try and utilize our partner agencies or ourselves for our partner agencies should we be called upon. Examples of the officer-involved deaths that we discussed. So it's the intentional or accidental use of deadly force. We talk about vehicular collisions that could result in death. Ones that get highlighted and make news are when an officer makes the decision to involve themselves in a pursuit, or they're driving in emergency mode and there would be a crash and a death as a result of that crash. If police vehicles are used as a weapon, ramming, roadblocks, there are specific, using your vehicle, a squad car to ram someone is the use of deadly force. Passengers in police vehicles, any custodial death. So whether it be, you could have jails that could have an officer-involved death if there's a death inside a jail. So anything that occurs except those while under a physician's treatment for a disease or other natural condition. Go ahead to the next one. But we also have officers that use force and people can be injured. And if we have a shooting that does not result in a death, we at the Wausau Police Department will still contact the Division of Criminal Investigation and ask for them to conduct that investigation for us. The DCI has become the heir apparent experts in conducting officer-involved shooting and officer-involved death investigations. We're just not capable at the Wausau Police Department of bringing the resources to bear and the expertise that they do. So our preference is always for DCI to conduct those investigations for us. The challenge for us would be if we have an officer-involved shooting that does not or is not anticipated to result in a death, there's a chance DCI, who may be investigating multiple other officer-involved deaths at that same time, would decline to investigate on our behalf, at which point in time we would have to utilize our partner agencies and ask them to conduct the investigation for us. That's happened one time, not because of the act of our officers, but we felt it appropriate in this particular circumstances where we're in a high-speed pursuit with someone. They pull into their driveway, they run into their house, ultimately committed suicide by gunshot in the home while surrounded by police, and we asked an outside agency to conduct that investigation on our behalf because we felt it was close enough to an officer-involved death that we wanted to follow that protocol, but DCI wasn't available to do that. So our internal policy will always be in an officer-involved shooting or an officer-involved death to use an outside agency. We will always start by asking DCI to be the primary agency conducting that investigation. If for whatever reason DCI is not capable of doing that for us, and then we will use our local partner agencies. I would tell you that currently we are in conversations because it's time to renew a memorandum of understanding with those agencies and figure out what is the best way for us to conduct those partner investigations. And the answer to that may not be to use local agencies to do that, to create some partnerships with some agencies that create some more physical distance from the police department. So those are the things we're looking at to figure out what's in the best interest for law enforcement in our general area. I want to talk about DCI just a little bit, Division of Criminal Investigation. For anybody not familiar with them, the best way I describe them is they're a giant detective bureau that works for the state of Wisconsin Department of Justice. So they have specialties, the fire marshals, which are really like, who end up being evidence collection experts, physical evidence, but they have white collar crime, they have public integrity investigators, there's gambling, people who specialize in gambling, there's specializing in homicide investigations, and they're specializing in drug investigations. And frequently they're called into areas that don't have large municipalities with significant police or sheriff's departments to provide resources in those type of investigations. I don't think 15 years ago they expected that a significant amount of their work was going to be investigating officer-involved shootings and officer-involved deaths for police departments. But given the statutes that require an outside agency, it's in everyone's best interest that the people conducting those investigations are really professional and get the repetition and the opportunity to be involved in those. So we'll always contact DCI and request that they conduct the investigation. It's important to understand how uncomfortable it is, especially the first time I made that call. Like when we contact DCI or another agency, we are relinquishing any authority or influence over that investigation. And so frequently the challenge to, especially to law enforcement management, is if you have a shooting, people are like, I want to know this and I want to know this and what about this? And we're not briefed every minute by DCI. We basically say we're hands off, we don't have any authority. We get the information they think it's important for us to know. And we'll get in a little bit, we'll talk about the partnership it requires for disseminating information to the public during an officer-involved death. But DCI is not beholden to us to take any type of direction on what the investigation should look like, what is evidence, what isn't, and who should be interviewed. So it's a relatively new thing for law enforcement to give up total control of situations like that. So ultimately, we talked about if they decline, we'll find someone else to do that. But at the same time, we're also still relinquishing control either to the Sheriff's Department or to Everest Metro and their investigators. I think one of the differences, and I would say in two of the most recent officer-involved shootings that, I've been the deputy chief and Chief Bliven's been the chief. we contact DCI and there's agents here for us within 20 minutes to a half hour. Those are the local agents that come. But DCI has shown up with an excess of 20 investigators to take care of all the different aspects. And just for frame of reference, the Wausau Police Department has 6 detectives. So even if we took our investigators and our detectives that we've put through officer-involved death investigation, I got to go, they gave you this book, right? So even if we took everyone that's been through that, we only show up with 1/3 of the resources that they do. And they have the State Patrol and the Crime Lab are all under the Department of Justice. And so they have all those resources available to them. And it's a pretty impressive thing to see how quickly and how professionally they do their job. We talked a little bit about our experience with DCI and what they bring to the table. They've done our last 3 officer-involved shootings dating back to 2015. And by all accounts, there has not been a single time in any of those investigations where we weren't anything but impressed with the professionalism and the thoroughness that they put together. And we'll get to a slide here in a second where I'll show you their investigation. But ultimately, over the last 40 years, and we feel, I wish this number was 0, but we've had 6 officer-involved shootings over the last 40 years, 2 resulting in death and 4 resulting in injury. The 2 most recent officer-involved shootings resulted in death, and that's our most recent experience. I just wanted to really cruise through quickly so you can see some of the things that are involved in an OIS or OID investigation. So number 1, there's the crime scene, and frequently those crime scenes can be pretty significant in size or entail multiple locations depending on what occurred in that situation. But from an evidence collection side, all the different physical evidence, every casing, every round, individuals can sometimes be evidence as well as any items there. In the day and age we're at, body and squad cam digital evidence as well as any digital evidence that exists on surveillance cameras on buildings. I think when we think back to 2 of the recent shootings we've had with body camera, DCI ends up reviewing hundreds of hours of video because the incident might not have taken that long, but when you have an entire police force who all wear body cameras responding to a scene, all of those body cameras and all that video and all the footage from their squads and all the footage from the community members, and we're at a day and age where just about everyone carries a video camera with them. That is all collected and all analyzed and reviewed at DCI. They bring in professional photographers, generally speaking, from the crime lab. Search warrants frequently have to get drafted, signed, and executed. Potential exists depending on the type of situation we're dealing with. There could be a blood draw, there could be medical records, both for injured individuals, for the officers that might be injured, or any witnesses. To know who was where and how, cell phone tracking and forensic analysis of the phone, where the phones are basically downloaded and all the information can be collected, as well as document collection and the different social media information that's available out there. All of these things are avenues that the investigators need to go down and look at. One of the hardest things to do in any death investigation, whether it's an OID investigation or others, is to knock on someone's door and tell them that their loved one is deceased. We have policies in our police department on that nobody ever just picks up the phone and calls someone, and this could be from a traffic crash or a natural death or any death. But in these particular cases, the investigators not only need to go make that notification, but frequently the people that they're talking to might have information relevant to why something occurred or what was in someone's frame of mind, or actually be witnesses to something that's evidentiary to our investigation. And so DCI will handle that statewide or nationwide if that's what needs to occur. One of the things that I think we get to see when we have an outside agency come in is the interview with involved officers. In the last shooting, I was one of the involved officers. I was not a shooter, but I was present there during a significant portion of the shooting. So I become an involved officer that has to be interviewed, so I guess I can speak from personal experience from that standpoint. At the day of the shooting, our officers are brought back to the police department. They're sequestered to some degree. They're not like locked in a closet or anything, but they're not there to have lots of conversation with other officers and say, what'd you see or what'd you see? And so the investigators will get a preliminary interview, which is important because it identifies, like, is there something there that's evidentiary that might not be, like, what happened real quick, like, so we know what we're looking for when we're looking for evidence. And frequently that will involve the investigator going back to the scene and doing a walkthrough with the officer to gather some information. In any homicide, there is an autopsy conducted. There's witness interviews with people who might be there. There's a neighborhood canvass that would occur, generally a block or two beyond the area where every door is knocked on. We document who we talk to. And there's a set list of questions that might be relevant to that shooting. And then at some point in time in the future, there are a formal interview with the involved officers. And so officers are expected to go home. They're given direction as to who they can talk to and who they can't. They're allowed representation. Generally speaking, it's a union representative from the WPPA and or a attorney associated with the WPPA who will meet with the officer. They wait 24 to 72 hours and then they give their formal statement. And generally speaking, the officers that pulled the trigger are the last ones. The investigation, all the interviews are conducted, and those are the last interviews to be conducted, which makes some sense because at the end of the day, those are the suspects in a homicide investigation. This is a criminal investigation that's occurring, and generally you want as much information as possible, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, before you go talk to the person that is the subject of the investigation. Now, we listened to the Garrity explanation from the chief just a minute ago, and that's the point at the bottom, which is none of our staff or anyone can be forced during the criminal investigation to give an interview. I will tell you that my experience in the 20 years at the police department is no officer has ever said, I'm not giving you an interview or I'm not going to provide this information. But it's important for you folks and the community to understand the officers can remain silent in this situation. Even if they were the shooter or the officer involved, they don't have to give the interview to DCI. Now, later, when we get to what an internal investigation is, they can be forced to answer questions or give a statement in the internal investigation, but their answers at that point in time cannot be used and shared with the district attorney in making a criminal charging decision. So maybe I just made things more confusing, but I hope not. Go ahead, please. In today's day and age, which is really different from the first time I investigated or participated in an officer-involved shooting, is social media and the media's expectations of us. So things are immediate. If in our last shooting we had someone that filmed a portion of it and put it out on Facebook, and before we even had a preliminary conversation with DCI, there are opinions about the shooting being drawn by the community and in the land of social media. So there's always a challenge. If you're the investigating agency, your motivation is not to share a whole bunch of information that may impact the validity or the quality of your investigation down the pipe. If you're the police department that had your officer involved in it, you want to get as much information to the community out as quickly as possible in order to prevent people from drawing a conclusion that may or may not be accurate. You want to get them accurate, truthful information that allows them to be satisfied that there's a thorough investigation being done, and that the information you can share, you do. I'd be lying if I said there weren't times when the chief and I got on the phone with the PIO for DCI and we're like, this is what we want to release, and they're like, we don't want you to release that, and we go back and forth, and it's kind of like we're buying a used car and negotiating what we want to release and how, and try and come to consensus. And historically, we've been able to do that. But we're solely responsible for the release of the officer's name. Generally, that is done after their formal interview, so it's usually a day, day and a half. But each situation might be different depending on the circumstances that exist, and making sure the officers are aware of when that's going to occur. And then from a transparency standpoint, I have I'd be happy to forward these slides to you. You see there's a website on the bottom here, and that's Division of Criminal Investigations website, where they publish, at the conclusion of their investigations, they publish the entire investigation on their website. Anybody, you could go to it tomorrow and read the report, reference our last officer involved shooting. It's a lot of reading. It's in excess of 500 pages, type pages, that you want to see what Matt Barnes said to him during my interview, it's there. So we like that DCI handles that component of it, as well as all the open records requests and the release of different pieces of media and redacting as far as body cameras are concerned, as well as other information. Go ahead. Here's just what you're going to find if you go onto that website. I took a screenshot here. You'll see it's a Wausau officer involved shooting. It's referenced Jack Bollinger, and you can see their cover letter, their synopsis report, and then if you looked at the public records release, you'll notice that that's in excess of 500 pages. Go ahead, please. At the end of the day, this investigation is all delivered to the district attorney, who has to make a decision. And ultimately, in this case, Teresa Whetstone is our current district attorney, and she has to decide, was this a justified shooting, or is she going to file criminal charges against the officers that were involved? That's not a decision the police department gets to make, and it's up to DCI to get that report there. They have to get it to the district attorney in the county in which that occurred. The district attorney has to determine, was this illegal? Was the death acted legally? And if the district attorney determines that the involved death did not act legally, the case proceeds through the criminal justice system with the district attorney filing charges against the officers involved. So we talked about the criminal investigation. That's DCI. We call them in, they do that work, but we still have a responsibility as the police department to determine not necessarily was there a crime committed by officers involved in the shooting, but did the officer act within our mission and our core values and within our policy. And so that's the internal investigation, to determine, are there any employment-related issues associated with the actions of our officer. Generally speaking, we wait until the interviews are conducted and we receive some information from the Division of Criminal Investigation, because we don't have to do certain things twice, and we're allowed to use the criminal investigation, but the criminal investigation can't use the internal investigation. So frequently this is a review, this is a brief conversation with our officers, and it's a review of our policies and the videos associated with that shooting. And then again, just like the chief had described in Garrity, we force our staff, as a condition of their continued employment, to participate in the interview and the internal investigation. I promise we're getting close. Real quick, and this maybe is a point that I would hope that this task force looks at, because any advice or information we can get that helps the wellness of our staff is something we would appreciate. So officers involved in shooting are generally traumatized individuals, and we're concerned about them, we're concerned about their families, and we're concerned about the impact of their overall career, in addition to the investigation that's occurring. So one of the things I just want this committee to know is we make arrangements for our staff, if they're involved in a shooting, to have time with a mental health professional. For the overall staff that's involved in this, that might include paramedics, fire personnel, dispatchers that were involved. We do a critical incident stress debriefing, which is facilitated by a mental health professional. And immediately upon being involved in an officer-involved shooting, the Wisconsin Professional Police Association is contacted and responds, not only as the representative for our officers, but the individuals that are called in to spend time with our officers. these folks have been, unfortunately, to a lot of officer-involved shootings, and there are things that they can say privately as protected information to our officers to help mitigate some of the stress they might be feeling. A couple of quick statistics. I know Mr. Klump North said he's a statistics guy, so these are WPPA statistics that started keeping these since 2014. Just to give you an idea of Wisconsin officer-involved shootings, and you'll see the difference between the shootings and then the officer-involved deaths from shooting from year to year. Obviously, it looks like there was a spike in deaths in 2017, but we had, 2014, we had 24 statewide shootings, and we had 32 in 2019. And so I hope that's not a trend we continue to see. Go ahead, please. Just wanted to show, the percentage of the shootings that officers are involved in where the subject are armed with guns. It definitely doesn't require a person to be armed with a gun in order for an officer to be justified in the use of deadly force. But 2019, a high number, that's 75% of the time the individuals that are being shot are armed with firearms. With regard to racial demographics of shooting that occurred last year, 63% of the individuals shot in Wisconsin by officers were white, compared with 52% in 2018 and 57% in 2017. And then since the WPPA began collecting this data 6 years ago, there have been 164 officer-involved shootings throughout Wisconsin. Of those, 95, or approximately 56%, resulted in fatalities. I'm not even going to look at how long that took, but.
Yeah, too long. If I can just follow up with one thing, and that is that, one of the biggest, nationally, one of the largest criticisms about officer-involved death investigations is the idea of transparency, and that there isn't transparency, and it's not a fair investigation. It's not a good criminal investigation into the incident. And so in Wisconsin, the deputy chief did a really good job of laying out the process, and I think about transparency, and I don't know how we could be more transparent in this process. We are required in an officer-involved death by state law to have an external agency, somebody not associated with our department, do the investigation. They come in, they do the investigation. That criminal investigation is referred to the district attorney, and the district attorney is an elected official, right? So they're an elected official that is reviewing this document on behalf of the community and determining whether or not there's criminal charges to be filed against a police officer in the case. And that district attorney then makes a decision as to whether or not criminal charges need to be filed against the police officer in the case. And then at the end of that decision, the entire report is published. It's published on the Department of Justice website. Anybody, anywhere can go on there and read the entirety of the report, like the deputy chief indicated. It's hundreds of pages long. All of the body camera footage is public record. The entire document and all of the footage is public record. So from a transparency perspective, I'm not sure how we could be more transparent in the state of Wisconsin. I think we do a really good job with that. And the investigations are extremely thorough. We have a great agency in the Division of Criminal Investigation that are very well versed in the issues and just do a great, thorough investigation. So from that perspective, I just think the state of Wisconsin does a really good job in regards to what is required and the transparency that exists. Now, I think the concern is that it usually takes 60 days to get the investigation done. Is typically 30 days and another 30 days for a district attorney to make the determination. And like the deputy chief indicated, there's a lot of demand today more than ever that there's an immediate answer. And so that's the thing that it would be nice if we could expedite that. But thorough investigations take time. And then when you ask the district attorney to review the case and you have hundreds of pages of documents and video, it takes time as well. So I think I just wanted to make those points in terms of transparency before we open the floor to questions.
Are there any questions? And we're going to have to be relatively quick because we have to set our next meeting date and be out of here by 4:30. Or by 4:28.
I can also maybe I'll forward the video that I think provides context to the committee.
I think that would be helpful, and maybe if we could pick up on this issue at the next meeting, if there are questions.
That's fair.
Be more than happy to attend. I think, I'd be lying if I didn't say to the chief when he's like, you got 20 minutes, and by the way, it took me 25. But,
Plus the technical.
yeah, the technical portion I take no responsibility for, that's the chief's fault. But I would say that my first criticism was like, this is, when I think about what is the catalyst for the mayor wanting to put a task force together, and when I look nationally at the conversations that exist, they all seem to revolve around officer-involved shooting, accountability, and transparency. And I can tell you, I have 16 hours worth of information I could share with you, and it's like crank it down to 20 minutes. So if there is a desire on the part of the committee for me to come back and answer questions, or there's a particular area here you'd like additional information, I think that of all the things you're going to look at, if we can make sure that the community is satisfied with what we're doing and how we're doing it with officer-involved shootings, for me, as an administrator, that's the most important thing that you guys can do to help me. And that's my pitch for, please ask questions and make sure you get everything you want answered.
Well, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say the same thing. I think we should pick up on this at the next meeting. And if you could, get us the slides and the video. That way we can kind of process the information and then come with questions if we have them.
Sure, and there may be a point in time when someone has questions about, you will now have access, because we'll get you the slides, to see the 550-page investigation DCI did on our last officer-involved shooting. You may have questions about that or the process that we followed, and I think that's really relevant, so I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
All right, in light of the time, we do not have our next meeting scheduled, and we've had the discussion about whether or not we should alternate between workday meetings and evening meetings. It may be worthwhile in our effort for engagement of the public if we could look at an evening meeting. And do we have a preference on the day of the week? I think we should try to maybe do this earlier, given the charge that we've given to Wpps, and just to do a check-in. So I'm wondering how people's schedules are on the 11th of January, which is a Monday, at 6:30, if we're going to do this.
Looks like this is
I'm sorry?
we should be open here. I don't see any.
Does that work for people? If a nod, the 11th at what time, 6 or 6:30? Do you have a preference? Let's do 6:30. Does that give people a chance to grab dinner and come, or is 6 better? 6?
Whatever,
I go 6:30.
6:30 on the 11th. And then we will try to develop a schedule for the year, or for the next few months at that meeting. We'll throw out some dates, and we will also spend some time going over the charter, and, expectations, and see what we need to do to address each of the issues in that charter in the context of civic engagement, in terms of research. And are there any items that we can begin to check off? One of the concerns that I have is that whole issue of the human services side. We have not begun to address that, and I think that was one of the primary focuses of this. How can we provide the support services to the community and the police department necessary to address those human health and human service needs of the residents, because they're spending a lot of time on those activities, and where should we go with those items? So think about those questions for the next meeting, and we will plan on meeting then on the 11th, and we will be communicating with you in the interim relative to Wpps and their involvement. And is there anything else any questions? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you, and happy holidays.
Thank you.